All right, and you are joining us for teaching the Holocaust using the humanities, integrating photographs, literature, art, and poetry to tell the human story. Let me give you a little information about our amazing presenter today. We're happy to have Kim joining us today. Kim Klett is a senior facilitator for Echoes and Reflections who has taught English in Mesa, Arizona for 31 years. She developed a semester-long, now year-long, Holocaust literature class in 2000 and teaches a class at Scottsdale Community College on the Holocaust. Ms. Klett is a museum teacher fellow at the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum, a teacher ambassador for Defiant Requiem, a Pathways for Peace fellow, and a teaching hard history teacher with Learning for Justice. She serves on the board of the Phoenix Holocaust Association. In addition, she is the Deputy Executive Director for the Educators Institute for Human Rights, working with teachers in post-conflict societies such as Bosnia and Rwanda. It is a pleasure for me to introduce you to Kim, and I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Joan. And thank you all for being here today. I know it's the last session and it's a long day, so thank you so much for being here. So Echoes and Reflections has a lot of different programs that we offer for teachers, and this one is brand new. In fact, it's my first time doing this one. I think I've done all the others, but not this one before. But it integrates a lot of things that I use in my classroom. So I'm really excited to share these things with you. We will mostly be using the PowerPoint, but then I will take you into our website to make sure that you understand how to utilize it, because I think you'll find it a great resource. Please feel free anytime to unmute and ask a question. We want to make sure that you know how to use the website, that you are able to use these resources in your classrooms. So just to tell you a little bit about Echoes and Reflections, we're a joint program of 3 organizations. So the Anti-Defamation League, or the ADL, which has been around for well over 100 years fighting for the civil rights of all people. We also have the USC Shoah Foundation. They provide our visual history testimonies. They were founded by Steven Spielberg after he filmed Schindler's List, and he realized that there were so many survivors who had not had their stories recorded. And so he made that his mission. And they have recorded over 54,000 testimonies now, including testimonies from survivors of other genocides. We also work with Yad Vashem, which is the memorial and museum in Jerusalem, Israel, and they provide a lot of our primary source materials that we'll be looking at specifically in this session. We have worked with over 125,000 educators since we came out as this organization in 2005, and I've been utilizing their materials since then. I think you'll see they're really good. All right, so our objectives for our hour together today are to explore a sound pedagogy for Holocaust education. We want to examine instructional enhancements to support student learning in the humanities, discover classroom-ready assets. You're going to get so many lesson plans, like I said, the visual history testimonies, primary source materials, with that focus on art, photography, and poetry today. We're going to enhance your personal knowledge about the Holocaust, including the history of anti-Semitism, and build confidence and capacity to teach this complex subject. And so I want you to think about when we teach the Holocaust. There's a lot of statistics, right? Numbers. We also have a lot of names. We have lists of people, and we also have a lot of numbers, right? These that are going to populate on this slide are different documents from the Holocaust, and each in its own could tell a very different story. This is from Krakow, right, in Poland in 1942. And looking at numbers and where people are being sent, for example, Treblinka, right? The extermination center. Here from the ghetto, Theresienstadt, an identification, right? Marked with the Star of David. Here, the numbers, again, of Jews that are being rounded up. And here from the Wannsee Conference, a list of the numbers of Jews in these different places that they're talking about murdering, right? And so I want you to think about so many of the documents that we see like these are from a perpetrator's perspective, right? Whether, again, it's the Wannsee Conference or looking at the documents that came from the ghettos and things like that. So many times it's from that perpetrator lens. And we're going to look at a lot from the survivors and from the victims and look at that lens today. Aaron Appelfeld, who was a survivor, he passed away a few years ago. But he said, sorry, I'm going to get this out of the way. He said the historical, by its nature, tends to accent the unfolding of events while indicating social and political trends. Art, on the other hand, has always sought out the individual and his inner world. And from that, it tries to understand the outside world. And I love that focus, on how that trying to understand that's what we're doing. He was a writer, right? And so trying to make sense of that, trying to understand what's going outside of us with art and through art. And so that's a lot of what we're going to look at today as well. Echoes and Reflections always begins with pedagogical principles. I'd like you to jot down as we're going through today and think about this. Jot down maybe 2 of these as I go through them, 1 or 2, that you think you do really well in your classes or in your Holocaust unit, and then 1 or 2 that you'd like to work on, or 1 or 2 that you'd like to explore deeper through Echoes and Reflections. So our principles are that we always want to define terms. So for example, if I'm talking about resistance, my students would first probably picture, a guy with a gun, right, in the Holocaust. They need to understand that term is much bigger, that there's spiritual resistance, there's cultural resistance. Smuggling food was resistance. Writing in a diary was resistance, right? So being really specific with our terms. We want to provide background on the history of anti-Semitism. We have a whole unit on that. We want to contextualize the history. If you're teaching the book Night, for example, by Elie Wiesel, and if you I know none of us would do this, but if you just gave it to the kids and said, here, start reading this book, right? And didn't put it into context, they're going to think that the Holocaust starts in 1944 in Hungary and that people were sent to Auschwitz, that there was a death march, right? But they're not going to have that outer context of what was happening through the history. They're not going to see Hitler's rise to power. They're not going to see the ghettos forming in Poland and other countries. Elie Wiesel describes the ghetto in his town as our own little Jewish community, right? That it wasn't such a bad place. So you want to contextualize and show where that book fits in, but also showing that bigger picture. You want to teach the human story. Using this approach through the humanities makes that a little easier, but also using those testimonies and things like that. We want to use those primary source materials. Every unit and every lesson in Echoes has those. We want to try to make Holocaust relevant. Why are we studying this? How does this connect to our lives today? We want to encourage inquiry-based learning and critical thinking. All of our lessons are built on that. So we don't have answer keys. We don't give little quizzes or anything like that. It's really meant to get the kids thinking and asking their own questions. We want to foster empathy. Again, I know that's hard to measure, but we want to try to foster it through this. And again, through the humanities, I think that makes that part easier. And then we want to ensure a supportive learning environment. So we want to bring the students safely into this study and take them safely out. We don't want to use simulation exercises. We don't want to try to scare them with graphic images. The history is heavy enough, in some of the words of the books without those extra images. So again, think of one or two that you do well, jot them down if you would like. And then think of one or two that you would like to improve upon or just explore more deeply. All right, and I'm going to move on in the interest of time. So we're going to start by thinking about photographs. And I'm going to show you a few photos and feel free to comment on them. I'll ask a few questions as well. Again, you can unmute or put it in the chat box. And then we're going to also talk about methods of using photographs in the classroom. So Barbie Zelizer, who wrote a book called Remembering to Forget, Holocaust Memory Through the Camera's Eye, said, photographs seem utterly real. They come, we imagine, directly to us, and they are the most effortless food for the mind conceivable. I really like that. They seem easy, right? If we're just looking at them quickly, they're easy. They're effortless, like she says. But then when we really start to hone in, and that's what we need to get students to do. Think about the way that we look at photographs today, right? Usually it's on our phones and we, have our phone up here and we look at it, swipe, look at it, swipe, right? And we're just going through them so quickly. And our kids do that. So thinking about how to slow down is really important. Photographs are primary sources, right? And these were taken at the time, at the event. And so using those for that critical analysis. So this is a photograph from Kristallnacht. This is November 9th and 10th. This one, I believe, was taken on the 10th of 1938, right? And this is a synagogue. It's been set on fire. Many synagogues throughout Germany, Austria, and the Sudetenland were ruined, were destroyed by these fires. What do you notice about the picture? What stands out to you? And again, you can unmute or put it in the chat box. Oh, okay, good. Yeah, I see the comment about using photos as a daily warm up. I love that idea, Goody. Yeah, excellent. And this one would be a conversation starter, right? Depending on, again, on your context, if you've talked about Kristallnacht or not. What might students notice in this photograph? Yeah, the bystanders. Exactly. You've got all these people, right, standing by watching. Now, if we were to see a house of worship or really any building on fire, we might do the same thing. If it's close by, we might go investigate, right? We're nosy that way. We want to see what's going on. And so a lot of these people probably did this. Like I said, this was during the day. It was on November 10th. And so my kids think they're dressed up. I think it's, just the way they dressed back then. But you see people on motorcycles and bicycles, they're out and about. They see flames. They come to check it out. They want to know what's on fire, what's going on. Yeah. Carolyn, I think that's a great example of today. And again, our kids probably don't remember 9/11. I think they learn about it in history, maybe. But yeah, they might make connections to things today, right? So when we're talking about what they're noticing, right, and getting them to slow down, this is a method on the next frame or slide that you can do where you break it into quadrants, right? And you could maybe put kids in groups of 4, and each person has a different square to look at. So the top two, obviously, you're looking at smoke and you're looking at flames and, this part that's the religious part of the building, right? That kids would recognize. Um, yeah, this is a great way to get them to slow down, because I would get so tired of the kids. I'd put them into groups and tell them, look at this picture. And after like a minute or less, they'd be like, okay, yeah, we're done. And they'd be chatting, about other stuff. This gets them to slow down. Here, you see these bystanders, and here you've got more of like the bicycles and motorcycles and things. You can also see some of the windows that have been broken out from the fire, right? And then you could also ask them, what don't you see? What's missing from this picture that should probably be there? Yeah, the fire department. Exactly. There's no hose. The only way, and if you've studied crystal knocked at all, the only way that there would have been firefighters or a fire hose trained is, let's say this building was something different. I believe it's connected to the synagogue, but let's say it was a different, an Aryan owned building, then they would have it trained, the hose trained on this. They wouldn't have it on the fire. They'd be protecting the building next door from catching fire. So I saw the question in the chat box, whole class with one section or different groups with different pictures. I could see it going either way. When I used this particular picture, I gave all the groups the same picture and did it this way. But yeah, you could give different pictures from Crystal Knocked. We're going to look at one more in a minute. You could have, there's so many pictures from that event that would be easy to do, and then do a larger share out. So yeah, lots of different ways you could do this. You also, if you didn't want to put the grid, on the picture, you could, depending on the kind of projector you have, cover up part of it if you were doing a whole group. So yeah, there are a lot of ways that you could do this one. Yeah, good. I'm glad you're thinking about that. That's what I want you to do, is think about how you're going to take these back to your classroom. How will these fit in to what you already use? So the next crystal knocked picture, this is also from November 10th, 1938. Anything you notice, and again, think about, I don't have the grid on this one, but think about if you did, right? And how that would slow you down and make you focus on an area. Anything here that you notice or your students might notice? Again, we have a lot of bystanders, right? And what I reminded my students about with this one is, this is the next day. So everything that happened on Crystal Knocked had happened the night before. And so I often would ask them, who do you think these people are? And again, I would have probably done a little bit about Crystal Knocked before this, so they would know that it probably wouldn't be Jewish people, because the men were being arrested and the women probably would have been afraid. Even though they weren't targeted, they, would have been afraid to be out. These are German people. These are everyday Germans who probably heard all the commotion the night before and were afraid to go out, right? And so they stayed home. This happened in the middle of the night, like around 1 a.m. You can see here, these windows have been busted out. These are Jewish owned businesses, right? And so they've been destroyed. There was looting, right? There was stealing. It wasn't supposed to happen, but it did. We have a great lesson on Crystal Knocked in Unit 3, which is called Nazi Germany, where you actually see the orders for that night that Reinhard Heydrich wrote up of what was supposed to happen and not happen that night. Fascinating to use with these pictures, right? But yeah, these are everyday people. They're going to work the next day. They are going to school, maybe walking the dog. Here's a child, right, in a stroller. They're just going about their business, but they're checking things out. They're curious, right? And so again, this use of photographs can be so powerful. I don't know about you all, but my students, I just retired in May, but my students over the years, every year, I feel like they got more reluctant about reading. And they didn't want to read. I made them. We still read. But this is where the power of photographs can come in as well, right? I know, Goody. I'm doing other things like this, right? So working with teachers and I'm loving it. But yes, I do miss my students for sure. But yeah, looking at photographs like this can be so powerful and they're still using those skills of analysis, right? So I think that's really important to think about as well. Another thing you could do with these is the process called see, think, wonder. So ask the students, give them the photograph. What do you see? Right. And they could even just write it down. We have a chart in the unit I'll show you that does this. Just what do you see? So very literal, right? What do you see in front of you? Okay, now what do you think has happened or is happening? Right. And maybe you do this before you've talked about Kristallnacht as an event and just kind of see what they think. And then what do you wonder? Right. And so that's a great way to analyze photographs as well in the beginning. All right. Sorry, I'm trying to watch the chat box as well. Yes. Yep, exactly. See, think, wonder. So this is a testimony. As I said, we use a lot of testimonies. Every unit in Echoes and Reflections has, no, you're good. You're fine, Giddy. Don't worry about it. We have lots of testimonies that are of survivors. The majority of them Jewish. We have a few exceptions, but most of them are Jewish. So thinking about the photographs we just looked at of Kristallnacht, here's a man who was about 24 years old in Berlin. And he's going to recount what he saw and witnessed the next day. So again, I want you to think about it. He's 24 years old. He's the age they're arresting, but he still takes this risk and goes out. And think about his role in all of this. It's really interesting. Okay, so need to remember to share. So I'm going to stop for just a second. I'm going to share for sound because I forgot to do that last session. Okay, good. We're on it. Okay, so here's Kurt Messerschmidt.
In 1938, that's one of those dates which I can never forget, and we all don't forget it. When November 10th every year comes around, I'm the one who remembers this day vividly, while even my non-American friends, American Jewish friends, don't remember it unless they read finally about it. This was the so-called Kristallnacht. That night, I listened to the radio, forbidden, BBC, the night before, and read all about what had happened in Paris, and that measurements would be taken to avenge the death of this Herrn vom Rath, killed by a Jewish boy. I listened to the radio in a friend's house, and I rushed home, woke up the next morning. My transportation to school was about 7 miles, was by bicycle. I was fortunate at that point. I still was allowed to have a bicycle. All these things were taken away later. I went through all these things, lost everything. But on bicycle, I went through 7 miles of glass splinters. It's amazing that the bicycle lasted. And my dear colleague, Uri Sonnenfeld, who was the main sports coach, was still there, and we sat there for a moment, deciding what to do. But there was no question. We took our bicycles and made a tour of the whole city of Berlin. We came to Friedrichstraße. It's a well-known term now. There was a little, very tiny cigar shop. The owner was a very, very old man, tiny old gentleman. But there were people standing around, 40, 50 people, and two of the Sturmabteilung, the SA, not SS. SS are the one in the black uniforms, and these are the brown, the brown shirts. Of course, with all their equipment, and they forced this very old gentleman to pick up the tiny glass splitters one by one. And they forced this man to do this. And they all were standing there and watching. We didn't know what to think, but the only thing we could think of was help. So we put our bicycles down. Rudy and I, we went in front of that group that was surrounding this old gentleman, went down on our knees, and started picking up glass splitters one by one to help this man. Briefly, I looked at the two guys. They didn't blink. They didn't move. Why did they not move? I asked myself. Are they afraid that the people might agree with us or not? I've never figured out what it was. But I'm sure in this particular situation that some of the people standing there disapproved of what the Nazis did. But their disapproval was only silence. And silence is what did the harm.
Such an amazing testimony. I love that last line, that silence is what did the harm, because he's exactly right. And, you know, he and his friend Rudy did the right thing. And like I said, they were taking a huge risk. They're young Jewish men. They could have been arrested. But I always find it interesting, you know, he talks about these bystanders. He doesn't call them that, but 40 to 50 people, he says, are standing around. And they saw that Rudy and Kurt didn't get in trouble, and yet they still don't do anything, right? That they just stand by and nobody else gets involved, even when they see that nothing happens to Kurt and Rudy. You know, because we always think of the fear, and I get that. That's very real, but even when they see nothing happens, they don't do anything. So it's a great video to use. I want to show you, I'm going to take you to the website because I want to show you where that is and where you can access it. So you can either follow along with me on your computer, or if you want to go to echoesandreflections.org, you can follow that way. So when you go to echoesandreflections.org, you don't have to sign in or register or anything. You can send students onto it if you choose. I would, you know, guide them, but there's there's just so much here. You're most of the time going to go to this on the menu bar, go to teach. And when you go to teach, there's our pedagogy that we went over, but then you're going to go to lesson plans, and they're really units. So they go pretty chronologically. You have studying the Holocaust, anti-Semitism, Nazi Germany, the ghettos, the final solution, liberation, Jewish resistance, rescue and righteous among the nations, complicity and responsibility, justice, life, and memory after the Holocaust, the green glass unit on contemporary anti-Semitism, and then our newest unit called Teaching About Genocide. We had a session on that earlier. Goody, I just saw your question about how it ended. Yeah, he doesn't, so all of the testimonies that we have, you can actually access through USC Shoah Foundation. They have a program called Eyewitness, and I will put that in the chat box. And if you go to Eyewitness, you can search for any of our testimonies. So you could just type in Kurt Messerschmidt and you would get his entire testimony. So you'd get to see or hear more of the story. Yeah, and exactly what happened next, right? So it's fascinating. Some of them are like, oh my gosh, the longest ones are like up to 5 hours long. Most of them are a couple hours, 2 to 3 hours long, but really fascinating. Where you're going to find Kurt is in this unit called Nazi Germany. So I'm going to take you to that and just show you how the units are set up and some of our assets. So there's that quote, right? We always start the unit with a quote from one of the survivors. We have all of the keywords, like a glossary from that unit. So every unit is unique. And if you don't know how to pronounce something, here you go.
Dachau.
It does it for you, which is cool. You have your standards here. So these are unique to every lesson and unit as well. They're for ELA and for social studies broken down. You have over here background information. You have your essential questions and objectives. So literally you could look at this today or tomorrow and teach it on Monday. It makes it very simple for you. It's great for new teachers or teachers new to teaching about the Holocaust, but also, you know, if you've been teaching it for a long time, like myself, I can pick and choose things from these units and add and supplement to what I already have, which is great, or replace because they have some really good stuff. And then it breaks it down into the lessons. You have handouts that can be printed or they can be downloaded to like Google Classroom or Canvas. All kinds of great resources. Here are some of the testimonies. The clips are short, like what Kurt's is actually one of the longer ones. Most of them are anywhere from like 1 to 3 minutes. You have maps. I mean, it's just so great. But when you come down, so I'm trying not to go too fast and get you dizzy here, but there's a whole lesson right here on Kristallnacht. So it gives you the background information. You have photographs. There's that See, Think, Wonder for the photograph. That's that photo that we were using. There's a handout about it, about the Kristallnacht. You have Kurt and then also Esther Clifford, another survivor who talks about it. Hers is really interesting. You have an eyewitness that I was just talking about, activity that you could do with Kurt's testimony. And then I love this part because you've got, like, here's that photo we were looking at, but you have other assets like Heydrich's instructions. You have a letter from a woman asking for money back that they stole from her that night. You have a narrative from a man who runs an orphanage of what they were going through at that point, and then another photograph. And then here you have a graphic organizer where, you know, you could give again, you could put them in groups, you could give them to them individually, you could do them all together, but this document analysis where they analyze all of these different assets that we have for Kristallnacht. So it's a great unit. I use this every time that I taught about Kristallnacht, and it's just fantastic, really great. So we'll come back to the units, but right now I'm going to go back to the slides, and hopefully you're seeing Mr. Messerschmidt again. Let me know if you're not. But
Yes,
we're going to move on. Okay, perfect. Thank you. We're going to move on to talking about the final solution. And that's another unit we have. It's the 5th unit. The Auschwitz album is a part of that unit. The Auschwitz album is, we're going to look at a few photographs from it, but it was a photo album that was found at a subcamp of Auschwitz by a survivor. She kept it, and it documented one transport into Auschwitz, into Birkenau, actually. And it has a lot of photographs. She actually found, her name was Lily Jacob, and she actually found a photograph of herself where they found her at a roll call. She found pictures of people she knew she was from Hungary. And if people saw pictures of their family members or of themselves, she would let them take it out. So when you can look at the whole album. And when you do that, you'll see there are some missing pictures. That's why she gave a lot of them away, but it's a fascinating resource. So those photographs, sorry, I was thinking they were in here. They were in the last session I did, but they are on our website. And again, definitely check them out. We'll go to Unit 5 in a little bit, and I'll show you where to find those because, again, for photo analysis, they're excellent. So next, when we're talking about the humanities, literature, of course, is a part of that. In Unit 5, the final solution, we do have excerpts from Night, from Man's Search for Meaning. I think we just revamped all of our units. I believe they have an excerpt from Primo Levi's Survival in Auschwitz, all kinds of excerpts. Dr. Alan Rosen, in a piece called Literature of the Holocaust, said, if history has sought objectivity, literature has been shamelessly subjective, offering ardently personal perspectives on what transpired. If history has generally concerned itself with the macro level, the group, the institution, the movement, literature has focused on the individual. It is through the individual that empathy comes to the fore, like to the forefront. And I just thought that was such a great statement, right? That literature, think about it. Like I said, Elie Wiesel with Night, he's honing in on his experience, right? What he saw, what he lived, and it brings it down to that micro level. So I really like what Dr. Rosen says here. And those of us who teach literature certainly know that. Again, Elie Wiesel with Night, I use that every year since 2000 when I taught the Holocaust. Students really enjoy that book. They are very interested by it. This is from a video that I used where Elie Wiesel it was an Oprah Winfrey special, and he went to Auschwitz with Oprah. It's a really good piece to use in the classroom. Goody, I taught seniors for this class. All of our materials on echoes and reflections could be for, not all the materials. Again, you want to check, your students best. So check them out for your kiddos first, but we say anywhere from 6th to 12th grade for most of our materials. But definitely, again, think about your kids in front of you. But I would show this video every year after we finish Night. We also at Echoes have a session that you can request on teaching Night. So if you can get, like 25 or so teachers together, we'll do an online program. We'll come out if you want an in-person program. And do one at your school or in your city or in your district, however that might work. So you can definitely request those programs. And, again, we have that one for teaching Night, which connects the book to our assets. If you've read the book, this scene. This is a selection when they first arrive at Birkenau, men to the left, women to the right. 8 words spoken quietly, indifferently, without emotion. 8 simple, short words. Yet that was the moment when I left my mother. Such a powerful scene. We actually have in that Unit 5 a testimony of a man named Ellis Lewin who describes that very scene. He also went through Auschwitz and Birkenau and describes it very much like Elie Wiesel does. He's also separated from his mother and his sister. And the power of literature, the power of scene like this, and how it can add to that history, right? The history component. I have a couple of friends who teach history and social studies, and they have made it work where they've been able to, in a couple of their different classes, work the book Night into their Holocaust unit. And I love that they, were able to, they were just very passionate about it and wanted to make that work and made it happen. So it doesn't only have to be English teachers either. Oh, okay, great. I knew these were in here. just a different order. We recently changed our slides a little bit too. This is one of those pictures from the Auschwitz album. So here you have that selection, right? You've got the women over here. You've got the men over here. Anything else you notice people-wise in the photograph? Who else is there besides the male and female prisoners? Yeah, the guards, right? You've got people in the SS right here. Scary looking officials, I agree. Yeah, he's got his baton here. Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah. You also see, like, here's a child, right? You see a prisoner in uniform because they were forced to help with the incoming prisoners. They were told to lie about what they were going to experience. Yeah, you see weaponry and things like on the hips. That almost looks like a canteen or something, but I don't know what that might be. Could be some kind of weapon. Here, a guy has what they called a truncheon as well. These prisoners had to lie. Like I said, they had to often unload. Here you can see a little corner of the cattle car. They had to unload those and get the stuff, everything that notice these people don't have suitcases or bags with them because they were told to leave them on the train. And they were told, of course, lied to, that they would get these things back later. Of course, they didn't, but it was to keep them calm, right? You'll get your stuff back later. So again, you could do that quadrant. You could think of ways to slow the kids down and look at the different pieces of this picture. Very powerful. With literature, we also have poetry. And I just want you to think about, if you have a favorite poem and what it does for you. The thing I love about poetry, I don't even know if I could name a favorite because I have so many that I like, and so many that I've taught over the years, but I love how it distills. A novel, you can use all the words you want, whereas a poem, you just have that small space. And so every word has to count. Almost every word has meaning. And I love that about poetry. And there is Holocaust poetry. Dan Pegas, I'm not sure if that's the correct pronunciation, but that's how I've always said it. He was a survivor. I saw in the chat box, Still I Rise, Maya Angelou. Yes, absolutely. One of my favorites. This is a poem called Written in Pencil in the Sealed Railway Car. Here in this carload, I am Eve, with Abel, my son. If you see my other son, Cain, son of man, tell him that Okay, so first of all, it's interesting to talk to kids about the cutoff, right? It's written in pencil. Did it get erased? Did somebody, yeah, that is the end of the poem. That's all there is to it. Did someone take the pencil from her? Did she drop it? Right? All kinds of questions with that. You also have the biblical Cain and Abel, Eve, right? So the story of Genesis. So you've got some of that you could talk about. Some teachers have used this. Yes, Cain murdered Abel. So there's that whole discussion as well. And yet she's with Abel, right? Some teachers have done it where they have a student read it out loud, like I just did. And then when they get to the end, another student picks up. So tell him that I am here in this, it circles back, right? Over and over again. So that's kind of an interesting approach that I've heard of people doing. Yeah, lots of there's so much to discuss with this, right? We could spend whole class period just on this poem. We could spend a day on this poem. And that's another thing that I love about poetry. Kids look at it and they're like, oh, I can read this easily. And then they start thinking about the different components, and there's so much to break down with it. So that's just one that we have. This is another one by the same author that I really like. It's called Testimony. No, they definitely were human beings. Uniforms, boots, how to explain. They were created in the image. I was a shade. A different creator made me. And he in his mercy left nothing of me that would die. And I fled to him, rose weightless, blue, forgiving. I would even say apologizing. Smoke to omnipotent smoke, without image, excuse me, or likeness. Ooh, there's a lot there, right? So teaching this, I would probably break it down by section, by stanza, right? So who's the they that he's talking about? Who's wearing the uniforms and boots? Yes, Carolyn, he did, I believe, only write about the Holocaust. Everything I've read of his, and I've not read everything, but it's all been Holocaust related. Yeah, and he was a survivor, which is interesting to keep in mind. Yeah. Yeah, it does help frame the poem, doesn't it? Again, that context, right? So the they he's talking about are those people we saw in that picture with the uniforms and the boots, the SS, right? Could be guards. And he's basically saying here they were created in the image of God, just like everybody, right? That we're all supposed to be equal. And I think it's also a great statement about a lot of times people want to say that the Nazis were monsters. And I agree, they did monstrous things. But if you call them monsters, it takes them off the hook because monsters can't control themselves, right? If we say no, they were humans, they were people, they made choices to do these things, right? That's the truth of it, and makes it even worse, right? That they were human and made these choices. And then here, I was a shade, right? Like he's not equal in their eyes, right? A different creator made me. That could get to religious aspects as well. And then again, here, the image of the smoke, right? From the chimneys, from the crematorium, that kind of thing. Again, we could talk for days about this. I'm glossing over it a little bit because I'm looking at the time, but just wanted to make sure that you see these poems. These are in our units. Yeah, exactly. Wow. Yeah. And again, I probably wouldn't do this with the seventh grader, right? So thinking about your age group of students, you know them best. You might have really advanced kids who could handle some of these things that others might not. Goody for inviting speakers to your classrooms. I know in Nevada there is an active Holocaust community, so I would reach out to them. I know in Las Vegas there's a Holocaust center, might be in Henderson. I've been to it. I can't remember. It's been a long time ago. But there are ways to bring survivors in. A lot of them, oh, okay, great. You're in Henderson. The other thing is a lot of them, this is one of the pluses of the pandemic, I guess. There aren't many. But a lot of them started doing Zoom and getting comfortable with that, or their children are helping them with it. And so it's easier to get them on Zoom sometimes into the classroom, but I did that as well, and it was still effective. It's always better to have the person in person if you can, but yeah, definitely do that if you can. So Itka, I've heard her name pronounced and I cannot say it ever. So I'm just going to say Itka is also in Unit 5, and she is going to talk about poetry on a very personal level. So let me play her testimony.
Physically, I was totally enslaved. I had no control of life. Spiritually, I could think and feel what I wanted. And I remember one time when I was in Auschwitz, and I felt the burden, the bitter taste of slavery. And I felt, oh, if I would have a pencil and paper now, I would write a poem. But there was no pencil and paper. I told you my earthly possessions was what I wore and the bowl, the enamel bowl in which we got the soup. So I wrote a poem in my head. And when I was liberated, when I came here to America, of course, I couldn't speak a word of English. It was constant adjusting from one to the other. So that was among my first poems, and I would like to share it. I feel like a bird with clipped wings, tied to this earth by invisible strings, chained to a destiny I did not choose. I feel like a prisoner that cannot break loose. I look at the sky with a heavy sigh, but my wings have been clipped, and I can no longer fly. And then I realized that the concept of freedom is a bird in flight and not in a bird in a cage. And I pledged to myself, if I'll get out, I will never use brute force. I will never try to force somebody to do something, but neither will I allow other people to do it. I understood the concept of freedom. I understood what my forefathers, what the Jews in Egypt, the Israelites in Egypt must have felt like. And I realized that there is no substitute for personal experience, from knowledge derived from personal experience. I realized then that nothing in the world, no textbook, no professor, not the best college, could teach me what my experience taught me, because I got to know myself, who I am, how much I could endure, how much I could understand, how much I could feel, and what I became.
And I love her testimony because, again, she's getting to that idea of what poetry did for her and how she saw things differently, right? And I think it's just such a great
physically,
oops, we
I
don't want to
was
start
totally
again.
enslaved.
And what that did for her. So I love that personal connection when we're talking again about the human story and focusing on that. And yeah, that experience, that's the only way you can understand it, right? Is going through it yourself when we're talking about that building empathy. And again, I think that's another place too where our students can relate sometimes. They didn't go through the Holocaust, but they've had traumatic experiences. And maybe they've found an outlet in writing poetry or doing some kind of art or writing music, right? Or something like that. And it can really help show them, I think, that aspect of it. So another connection for them. I'm watching the time, so I'm going to go through these next slides very quickly. Poetry and diaries. We do have, so there's another photograph that we have from the ghettos unit. We also have the Holocaust in art. So Peter Gins was a young man who was raised actually Catholic. He was from a mixed marriage, but was seen as being Jewish. And so he ended up at Terezin, the ghetto and camp in Czechoslovakia. And he created this artwork. He also did writings. Unfortunately, he was murdered in Auschwitz, but we have excerpts from his diary in Unit 4. And then he also did this artwork. And so he said, the seed of a creative idea does not die in mud and scum. Even there, it will germinate and spread its blossom like a star shining in darkness. A copy of this was actually taken up by astronauts. There was an Israeli astronaut because Peter Gins, he wrote about it in his diary. He was fascinated with space exploration. And so they took his drawing up, and unfortunately, it was one of the missions that exploded. And so it was a copy of the drawing, but still tragic. This is a painting we also have in one of our units. It's called The Refugee, and it was done by a Jewish artist named Felix Nussbaum. He was hiding in Belgium and was caught. He kept painting while he was in hiding. and was caught and taken to Auschwitz, both he and his wife, where they were murdered. But again, looking at this, knowing the title is The Refugee, this man who feels hopeless, right? He's in this almost fetal position. He's got his bag and his walking stick. He's been wandering. You've got the world, right? And nobody wants him. It's in a shadow. It's also like out of reach to him. It's very far. The room looks like a prison. You've got this outer part, but it looks very dead. Your kids would probably think this too. My kids always thought they were palm trees. But you know, it's kind of dead looking out there, right? And yeah, I agree with the comment in the chat box, empathy building, right? For sure. And so there's a lot of art. I'm not going to show you this video, but it's in our units as well, teaching the Holocaust using art. It's a short video to help you navigate that. This is also in Unit 5. It's called Appel, which is the roll call, 1944. This is at Birkenau. You can see, you know, people who didn't make it in the roll call. They had to stand out in the snow for hours, sometimes waiting until the SS was ready to come out and make sure that everybody was there. And so again, this drawing that you could use, a lot of artwork we incorporate. And so taking that poem that we looked at, Testimony, and using a part of it to look at it with this drawing, I think could be very powerful. So again, ways that you could connect a couple of pieces of, you know, with the humanities. So I want you to think about, again, if we had more time, I'd love to have a discussion on this, but just kind of thinking about which form of the humanities, you know, photographs, art, literature, poetry, which one spoke to you the most? What would you want to take back to your classroom? You know, which resources are you excited about taking back? So definitely think about that. I just want to show you, we didn't go to this section, but when you go to our page, there's a section called Prepare. We have all free programs for teachers. We do webinars. There are 4 to 5 every month. They're recorded, so you can always watch a recording of them. We have an online class, always going, at least one that you can take. Again, it's free, just to expand your knowledge and give you more resources, all kinds of things in the Prepare section. So please check that out. I'm going to stop sharing. Yeah, we're not going to use that QR code. I'm going to stop sharing. In the chat box, I am going to put a link to the Echoes and Reflections evaluation/survey for you to do. It will ask for my name. So there's my name again. And our session was teaching the Holocaust through, I think it's like humanities. So I'll just put that. You'll need those 2 pieces of information to fill that out. Any other last questions? So I hope you use our materials. Definitely check out the website, explore. It's a rabbit hole. You can go down and just find so many materials, and I hope you can use them in your classroom. They're excellent. Thank you. Thanks for coming today.
All right, I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording, and I would like